The Star Trek Discovery Dilemma. Where did it go wrong? This is a review about the Star Trek Discovery series. I will warn you, this is more of a negative review with some positives as well. So, grab your phasers, set them to skeptical, and let's dive into the final frontier that never quite took off. First impressions and initial hopes. I will admit I did not watch all 5 seasons. In fact, I tuned out early in Season 3. The series started out on a positive note with a different look and feel compared to how Star Trek normally plays out. The updated visuals and ambitious storytelling were intriguing at first. It seemed like a fresh take that might breathe new life into the beloved franchise. However, the first mistake the series made was positioning itself as a prequel to the original Star Trek. This decision created friction with how the original story played out, leaving many fans scratching their heads and asking, why mess with a good thing? The Spock sibling saga. One significant issue was the introduction of Michael Burnham as Spock's previously unmentioned half-sister. This character was never spoken of in the original series or movies. It's like discovering you have a long-lost sibling through a Facebook friend suggestion. Awkward and confusing. Season 2 did provide a half-decent explanation for this familial connection, which somewhat placated my inner Trekkie. But really, was this story arc necessary at all? It felt like an unnecessary complication rather than a meaningful addition to the Star Trek lore. Technological overload, the Spore drive. Another factor that failed Star Trek Discovery was the inclusion of overly intense fictional technology, such as the Spore drive. This nifty piece of tech did receive an explanation for why we never heard of it before, but it still felt out of place. Star Trek thrives on conflict and challenge, giving characters something to struggle against. The Spore drive, however, made things too perfect. It was like giving Harry Potter a smartphone. Sure, it's cool, but it takes away from the magic, pun intended. Character development, or lack thereof. One of the glaring issues in the series was poor character development. Even up to the end, we never really got to know the names of the entire crew of the ship. The series focused more or less on just a few select characters the whole time. In other Star Trek series, supporting characters would get their own standalone episodes, sometimes more than once, allowing viewers to connect with a diverse array of personalities. Discovery missed this mark entirely, leaving many characters as mere background scenery. The emotional roller coaster of Michael Burnham. Then there's the title character, Michael Burnham, who seemed to cry in almost every single episode. This repetitive motif not only showed a perceived weakness of the character, but also reflected poorly on the storytelling. We get it, space is hard, but come on, Captain Kirk didn't weep every time a Klingon showed up. Star Trek and diversity, a missed opportunity. Star Trek has always been about diversity, which is one of its strongest suits. Discovery attempted to carry this torch, but missed the mark. Instead of having characters who just happened to be of different species and backgrounds, the show often felt like it was presenting a social and political lesson to be forced upon the viewer. While the intention was noble, the execution was heavy-handed. Instead of feeling naturally inclusive, it often came off as preachy, which can have the reverse effect and turn people away from watching. Production woes. This series did have some merit to it. I think there were just too many changes of hands in production and direction throughout the episodes in every season. This inconsistency prevented the show from reaching solid ground, making it feel disjointed and lacking a coherent vision. The audience factor. Despite these issues, there is always an audience for anything. Yes, there was an audience for this series as well. However, most of this audience were not the original Star Trek fans. In the beginning, Star Trek was a niche market, a utopian vision of the future that resonated with its viewers. Discovery, on the other hand, felt more like a generalized sci-fi show rather than true Star Trek. It did not follow the brand as it intended to be, which alienated many longtime fans. Conclusion: a trek too far? In conclusion, Star Trek Discovery was a bold experiment that ultimately did not meet the expectations of the regular Star Trek fanbase. Its attempts to innovate were often at odds with the core elements that made Star Trek beloved in the first place. From unnecessary story arcs and overpowered technology to poor character development and heavy-handed messaging, Discovery struggled to find its place within the Star Trek universe. While it did manage to attract a new audience, it often felt like it was trekking too far from the path that Gene Roddenberry originally charted. And so, dear readers, we find ourselves in a galaxy of mixed feelings. Here's hoping that future Star Trek endeavors learn from Discovery's missteps and boldly go where no series has gone before, while still staying true to what made us fall in love with Star Trek in the first place.